It's comfortable.
Yes, we may not get up now.
Good morning, everyone. It is
Yeah.
okay. Well, welcome, everyone, and thank you for coming out today. We're proud to bring to our campus today for a conversation on the challenges and opportunities facing the European Union to I think I'm going to need a new mic.
That's the thing, guys. When you come back on campus after a year and a half away,
Nothing works.
You got to fine tune everything. Exactly. Nothing works. Although our mics seem to be working okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
they seem fine. While we're waiting, can I just ask, I know most of you are students, but, so, just show of hands, how many students?
Okay.
Any faculty? Thank you.
All
Are
right.
there particular classes that are here?
Well, you guys, we're
Let's-
looking forward to the questions, by the way. Just be aware.
Yeah, that's right. That row has to do the question.
Do they?
No.
Yeah. My name is Ken Nivison. I'm the interim dean of the School of Arts, Sciences, and Education here at SNHU. Pleasure to welcome all of you here today, both in person and via live stream. We hope to have a wonderful conversation today with our two distinguished guests. I am honored to welcome to our stage today His Excellency States and the Honorable Jean Shaheen, United States Senator from our home state of New Hampshire.
Thank you.
Your voice carries quite well, unless it's necessary for the live stream, I suppose.
I've done it in this room a few times. Right. Allow me to introduce you to them in a little bit more detail. The first woman in U.S. history to be elected both a governor and a United States Senator, Jean Shaheen, is a trailblazer with a reputation for working across the aisle. She has served the Senate since 2009 and is a member of the Senate Committees on Armed Services, Foreign Relations, Appropriations, Small Business, and Entrepreneurship, and the Select Committee on Ethics. Senator Shaheen is the only woman on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and currently serves as the subcommittee chair on Europe and Regional Security Cooperation, as well as co-chair of the Senate NATO Observer Group. She is a leader on protecting our democratic institutions from foreign intrusion, enhancing our cyber defenses, and working with our allies to improve trade and security cooperation. She is a long-standing supporter of our university, and so I ask you to join me in welcoming back to our campus our friend, Senator Jean Shaheen.
Thank you.
Stavros Lambrinidis is the ambassador of the European Union to the United States, a post he has held since March 1st, 2019. From 2012 to February 2019, he served as the European Union Special Representative for Human Rights. In 2011, he was Foreign Affairs Minister of Greece. Between 2004 and 2011, he was twice elected member of the European Parliament with the Greek Social Democratic Party. He served as Vice President of the European Parliament from 2009 to 2011 and Vice President of the Civil Liberties, Justice, and Home Affairs Committee from 2004 to 2009. Ambassador Lambrinidis studied economics and political science at Amherst College and law at Yale Law School. So he has a little bit of New England in his soul. We're grateful for that. Right. Please join me in welcoming to our campus and our state, Ambassador Lambrinidis.
hikers.
What we got to do is just have all of you come down to the front, and then we can get rid of the mics.
Yes.
So just so you have a sense of how this will work over the next however many minutes we have left, I have a few questions that I'll pose to our guests here. They will have a conversation on those. I'll pivot to a couple of other questions. At the end, we'll certainly open some things up to all of you to ask some questions. And for those of you students in the room, this is when your professors are paying attention to you. Okay? So it's your chance to impress and your chance to shine, if you would not mind. Let's begin, if we could, with Afghanistan as a pressing issue, both for the European Union, the United States, and indeed for the world. As we all know, the U.S. recently wound down its 20-year military commitment in Afghanistan, and we commemorated more recently the 20th anniversary of the September 11th attacks that spawned that conflict. I'd like to pose two questions and get your thoughts on them. You can take them collectively if you like. First, from your perspective, what are the short and also the medium-term challenges to Afghanistan and the region of the Taliban's resumption of power in Afghanistan? And perhaps second, in maybe a wider angle, how will these 2 decades of war, the legacy of this conflict, challenge the ensuring human rights and self-government challenges in the region and around the world? Senator Shaheen, perhaps you could take this question first.
I will. Thank you very much for the question. And let me begin by thanking all of you again for coming this morning and thanking Southern New Hampshire University for hosting us. And we're delighted to have the EU's ambassador to the United States here with us. And as you heard from his resume, he has a real wealth of understanding about what's happening, not just in Europe, but around the world. And so I look forward to hearing his insights. I also want to recognize my staff who are here. And I do this in the context of saying, we're always looking for interns in Washington and in New Hampshire. So if you have any interest, I'll do a little commercial in working with our office. My state director is Sarah Holmes, right there. Amy English works in Washington on international issues, and Chris Scott works in the New Hampshire office. So let us know if you have any interest in working with us. One of the things that we have worked very hard on over a number of years has been what's happening in Afghanistan. And as most of you don't remember September 11th and how the country responded to that, but the celebrations on the 20th anniversary were a reminder of why we went to Afghanistan in the first place. We went to address the attacks, to respond to the attacks against the United States, to look for those terrorists who were responsible for that. And I think the mission in Afghanistan turned into a much bigger engagement than was envisioned at the start of that war. And it was affected by what happened in Iraq afterwards in 2003, the decision to go into Iraq. And I think that sort of took the focus off of the United States' attention on what was happening in Afghanistan in ways that I believe extended the war. But one of the issues that I got very involved in, and this is you ask what are the mid and longer term needs in the country. One of those needs is how we continue to evacuate those Afghans who want to come to the United States or get out of the country, and the American citizens that are left there. There are 100 to 200 estimated American citizens still in the country, and as well as a number of other people who helped over the 20 years with the effort in Afghanistan. But there are 2 areas, as I said, that I've really been involved in. One is trying to help those Afghans who helped our men and women in the military get out of the country. It has been about a 10-year effort in our office to try and change how we dealt with those special immigrant visa applicants, the SIVs as they're called. And I first got interested in it because I read an article about the fact that we had a very long queue of people who were trying to get out of the country. And I worked with John McCain for a number of years before his death, every year, to try and increase the number of people, to try and address the problems at the State Department and the Department of Defense and the difficulties with getting them through the process. It was a very frustrating effort. And so when we got to the evacuation, we had probably 300, Sarah, or so, Afghans who our office had been working personally with, our personal office, to try and help them leave the country. That number has grown to over about 2,000, I think. But so that was one of the issues that I had been very involved in for a number of years. Another was what was happening with women and girls in Afghanistan. And I think one of the huge successes of the invasion of Afghanistan was the effort to help improve the lives of women and girls. The passage of an Afghan constitution that protected the rights of women, that allowed for freedom of movement, which was not available before under the Taliban, that gave women the opportunity to go to school, to work, to do so many of the things that we take for granted here. And clearly, the fate of women and girls in Afghanistan is one of the very big challenges, I think, now that we need to stay focused on and to think about how we continue to raise that issue in the international community. I had an opportunity, as I think the ambassador knows, to meet with a number of ambassadors from the NATO countries who were engaged in Afghanistan with us. And that was one of the issues we talked about, was how can we, NATO countries and the international community, continue to raise that issue and do everything we can to help protect the women and girls who are really at risk in Afghanistan right now because of the Taliban. So I think that is an immediate and long-term challenge that we face. Another is just how do we address the humanitarian situation there? The economy has collapsed. The estimates are that there will be significant Afghans who are in need of food. And the challenge for us in the West is how do we support the people of Afghanistan without appearing to support the Taliban? And I think that's a real challenge that we have. So those are sort of at the top of my list of immediate challenges. And I'll let the ambassador address the 2 decades of war issue, because based on your human rights background, you probably have some very salient thoughts about that.
Thank you, Senator. Thanks a lot. So, dear friends, I'm the EU ambassador, in case you didn't know. This looks a little bit like Hannibal Lecter, I think. But this is the European Union flag right there. And it's really good to be here. You know, we almost didn't make it last night because of storms back in DC, but I guess you know well what that means.
Yes.
In flights from DC, but our mettle was truly to get here to the live free or die state, and we did. So I have one more day to live free in New Hampshire, or die, I suppose. But I hope it's going to be living free and happy together with the senator. And let me just say, thank you so much to the senator for the proposal for this visit. Now, those of you in the room know the senator is frankly a rock star back in the Senate and in Washington, but also in transatlantic relations. She does chair the Europe and Border Security Subcommittee, and we've worked very, very closely in the past on many topics, some of which we'll discuss today. But indeed, from my previous days as running the European Union's human rights foreign policy, I have to say that the senator's commitment to women and girls has been a true inspiration. So if I can start the answer to your question by posing another question, and the question is, you know, what is so scary about smart girls? Why did the Taliban in Pakistan plant a bullet in Malala Yousafzai's head, trying to kill her, young girl, promoting girls' education? They didn't manage to kill her. She became a Nobel Prize winner eventually. Why did they do that? What was so scary about Malala? Why did Boko Haram in Nigeria abduct 300 girls from school a few years back instead of just bombing one more police station they're good at? And in Iraq, that Jean mentioned, why did ISIS, abduct, forcefully marry, rape, they did, so many Yazidi girls? What's so scary about smart girls to terrorists? And the answer is, to me at least, quite clear. Smart girls become educated girls, and educated girls become empowered women. And empowered women change entirely the balance of power in any society. And the last thing that a terrorist wants is empowered societies. They want societies with big black holes of power that they can fill in with the hatred and with the violence. So if you want to fight terrorism, educate girls and boys. Don't tell me that's soft policy. That's hardcore foreign policy. And I agree with the senator that we did it in Afghanistan. We failed in many things, obviously. But we did not fail in this. And now, if you look at what the European Union foreign ministers and Josep Borrell, the EU foreign minister, decided together, we have to engage with the Taliban. We don't recognize them. We have to engage with them. And we've set 5 benchmarks to ensure that we do this, which also reflect the challenges of the future, the immediate challenges, and Gina addressed a number of them. So we're going to work with them to ensure that terrorism doesn't flourish back in that country. And if it does, we're going to hold them accountable. We're going to work with them to ensure that people can still live the country, Europeans, Americans, Afghans, others, and not be trapped in it if they want to go. We want to work with them to ensure that migration. You didn't mention that, Jim, but migration for us in Europe is a huge issue. I mean, Europeans have a real strategic interest in what happens in Afghanistan, which is why we're discussing quite intensely with the Biden administration about the process of this withdrawal. I mean, uncontrolled migratory flows can be a very, very major destabilizing force for the region around Afghanistan, potentially for radicalization and terrorism, because if a lot of people, especially young people, leave and then find themselves stuck in situations where there's no future for them, well, guess what? They're quite easy to pick for extremists. And of course, the difficulty for countries to which they will go if they cannot absorb them and take them in. Now, we've massively in Europe and in the US managed to take out people who worked for us and other people who were in immediate danger. That's, over 100,000 people. But, obviously, we have to be able to support the countries around Afghanistan to be able to keep and protect and support many, many more migrants who are going to be coming out so they don't try to flow all over the world, to protect them and to ensure also. Then humanitarian aid is a 4th element, and humanitarian aid is hugely important right now. The interesting thing about humanitarian aid, guys, and this is where it gets tough, is that the way that the EU does it, it is entirely non-political. The name implies it, and that's what's under international law. So if someone is in danger of dying, they deserve humanitarian aid. Doesn't matter if they are, someone you like or someone you hate or whatever. It's just a human rights process. Of course, it can have political implications. But the way that we are dealing with this now is to try to find a way to ensure that we can send billions of dollars and euros in aid, humanitarian in the country, but do so directly to make sure that money gets to the people on the ground and doesn't get funneled and disappears through corruption or through the Taliban. So that is a process we're working very closely with the UN. And finally, I should say, of course, we do care about what happens in the government. The Taliban put a government in there now, a transitional government that has only men and only Taliban in it. That's not okay. It could be very destabilizing the country. We're not going to get details unless you want the question and answer to talk about Afghanistan, what it's comprised of, but it's a very complex social entity. It's not just monolithic, the Taliban and the non-Taliban or something like that. And if you don't manage to reflect on the government, the danger of a civil war has not disappeared. So, what's going to happen in the future? What did the past 20 years taught us? I hope that what's going to happen is that Europeans and Americans are going to work even closer together to address those challenges. It wasn't really all smooth sailing with the decision to get out of Afghanistan, honestly. But this has to be the pivotal moment that we actually decide that when we actually fight Europeans and Americans together and die together, and in Afghanistan we did, we have to be able to, to use a collective strength. And European Union member state militaries and the American military are the biggest and strongest in the world. We have to do this together. And we have to find also a way to use a collective human rights power and values power to try to infuse the region and those societies as much as we can with an understanding that, this is not kumbaya, as I said, when it comes to educating girls, an understanding that unless people manage to find a way to live with each other, catastrophe will ensue. And the biggest tragedy in Afghanistan today is not on the US or in Europe, it's on the Afghan people themselves, who for the past 20 years have been fighting, and now they're back again, not 20, 40, 50, they're back again at the beginning. So that's what I draw as a conclusion.
Let's stay on the topic of things we need to work together about and move to climate change, if we could. The recent Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report outlined some fairly grim projections if we do not take swift action and rather complete action. And I think everyone in this room and everyone live streaming right now can point to a moment, even recently in their own lives, when they have felt the effect of climate change, of global warming. We are about to head into the UN Climate Change Conference soon. So I'm wondering, what are your hopes and expectations for that meeting and then for subsequent meetings? Do you see a path to align the political consensus on climate change with what is a very clear scientific consensus on the issue? Ambassador, we could start with you on that if you'd like.
Sure, thanks. Let me start with the local and then go to the global. So Europeans love New Hampshire, and they love it for many reasons, but they also love it for its extraordinary natural beauty. And I'm not talking just simply about the leaf peepers that come here when the leaves are turning. I'm also talking about the White Mountains. I'm talking about the coastline. I'm talking about everything. And I know something about the New England, having also studied in Massachusetts. So, the fact is that if anyone didn't believe in climate change in this country, I think that the ravages in the coastline and the forests and the floods, killer climate events in the past few years, well, I hope that have woken up those people to the fact that this is real. It's not a hoax. It's happening. And it's going to affect lives and livelihoods in a major way. Did you know the Defense Department, the U.S. Defense Department today, has a special section it created to deal with the effects of climate change on U.S. national security and defense? That's the Defense Department. It's not just some tree huggers, for those of you who just think that climate change is just for the tree huggers. Okay? Now, in Europe, we face the same issues. And we face them, and we decided that as we come out of COVID, we're going to be investing massively to change the economy of Europe for the 21st century. And we believe that if we do so, we're going to have an economic competitive advantage that is unparalleled in the world. So we are investing trillions of euros into transform our economies to green economies. We have laws in place. We put laws in place, the European Parliament, to ensure that by 2050 we are carbon neutral, the first continent in the world, and by 2030 we have reduced carbon emissions by 55%. Now, this is not going to save the climate only, but it's tremendously important for new growth and new jobs, and we know this. Not just among ourselves, but also around the world. Every country will have to change. Who's going to have the technologies in place to be able to give to those countries, sell to those countries even, when the time comes? So whoever does that has a first mover advantage. It's hugely important. This is jobs and livelihoods. And if you miss that train, because you fight with each other politically and crazily about whether or not climate change is happening, good luck. Good luck. Well, we're not. Interesting, second point, in Europe, climate change is not a political issue. It's not divided among political lines. In the last European Parliament elections, every political party, from the far right to the far left, and we have several political parties in Europe, all the voters listed climate change as the number 1, 2, or 3 priority for the European Union to address. It was not a political issue, and that, of course, helps create the political pressure and the political will that you mentioned, at least in Europe. Okay? Number 3, we need to get other countries to jump on the same train. Okay? And to do so, we need to provide both pressure and incentives. Now, the President Biden, has taken the initiative of returning the United States to the Paris Agreement. I think that was a very, very important move that Europe immediately commended. And to convene 2 leader summits already to be able to discuss with major economies around the world how to promote climate change. John Kerry is very active. Frans Timmermans, everyone in the European Commission, the President von der Leyen, President Michel of the European Council, European Commission, kind of the government of the EU, European Council, the heads of state of the 27 member states, together with the European Parliament, that's the structure of Europe. Happy to explain more. Not very different than the structure in the US, although it sounds a little different sometimes. So, but we need to give money to other countries, especially poor countries, to transition. And we have committed that money. We've told them 100 billion a year. It's a lot of money. But we can do it. And there the US also has to come on board. The EU right now is giving about 50% of all climate finance to third countries. But the EU is only 8% of carbon emissions today in the world, the European Union. China is the biggest emitter. Virtually all G20 economies are there. China, the US, India, some EU countries, etc. So, but we have many countries from abroad, and if we don't give them the impression that we are there to support them in this, then when COP26 comes, I'm very, very, very afraid that we will not be able to get the political commitment from everyone that we need. So this requires money. And whether or not this can happen in a reconciliation bill in the US or in some other way, it has to happen in the same way that we are struggling in Europe to get that money and to find that money. We got to do that. We got. In a nutshell, is where we stand in climate change. We need to save the planet. It is in grave danger. It will destroy us if we don't save it, and we're doing it. We need to create the innovation and the jobs of the future. And this is what America and Europe now are working together on. So on the 29th of September, we'll talk about trade later, I assume. We're going to be discussing, among many other things, how we can coordinate our research and innovation leadership, Americans and Europeans, to set the standards and to find the new technologies for climate as well in the future. Hydrogen, hugely important and expensive to be able to turn into green hydrogen, but probably the biggest source of new energy, the most efficient way to transfer energy, to transport it in the pipelines and stuff. So huge investments required. Let's do it together. Storage capacity, whether it's batteries or hydrogen or other stuff like that. Without it, green energy doesn't work. Let's do it together. If Americans and Europeans get our smart scientists, business people, regulators together, I have zero fear, either about the climate or about how we come out of it. Sorry, final point. Just transition, guys. Climate change is going to get some people lose their jobs as we transition, okay? It's just a fact. And we know this in Europe. And we have decided we're not going to let the markets figure it out for these people, because the markets won't. In the same way that they didn't when globalization was hitting openly. So we have set up a multi-billion euro fund in Europe that will go directly to those coal mining communities that will lose their jobs, and we're already working with them, talking to them. What do they need? Not just training, retraining, but bringing in new businesses in those areas, doing all those things that are necessary. Because if this is not a just transition for everyone, politically speaking, it will not work. The pressures will be too high to go away from it. So you have the same issues in this country, I'm sure. How you will deal with that just transition may determine what the political will of the people will be. We know this is a crisis in Europe, and so we have tried to focus on that as well.
Let me just be brief because I know the time is getting short. One of the things that we are working on right now are several pieces of legislation that has climate as a big piece of that. And we just passed an infrastructure package out of the Senate that included $60 billion for resilience to address climate. And one of the biggest proponents of that was a Republican named Bill Cassidy from New Orleans, because he's seen what the hurricanes in the Gulf, which are the result of climate change, the extreme and the numbers of hurricanes that have gotten much worse because of climate change. So we also finally have a bipartisan caucus that is working to try and address climate issues. So we still have the real political divide on this issue, which continues to be a very big challenge. But I am optimistic that we are going to be able to get some things done on this. We also are working on a reconciliation package, it's called, because it will be acted on only with Democratic votes, but there will be significant investments in that reconciliation package to address climate change, and we are still working on what exactly those will be. There will be a delegation going to Glasgow for the COP26. I happened to get to go to Paris as part of a group from the Foreign Relations Committee for the Paris Climate Accords back, I think that was COP24, if I remember correctly. So there is a commitment on the part of, there is a growing commitment, I think it's fair to say, growing bipartisan commitment. Not enough and not what we need to do, but there is discussion about, as we make these changes, the same kinds of issues that the ambassador brought up. How do we address those people who are displaced by the change to a clean energy economy to address climate change? So there's a lot to be done on this issue, and I think the most encouraging thing for me is the commitment that young people have on this issue, who are really pushing on the political system. So those of you who are out there talking about this on social media, talking to your friends about what we need to do in this country, and really pushing on politicians to say, we can't wait, we've got to address this. And we can't wait, there's no doubt about it. The storm that kept the ambassador in Washington yesterday is the result of climate change. You know, it doesn't rain an inch in 20 minutes unless there's something unusual going on with the climate. So we've got to do something about it, and I am hopeful that we can build a consensus. And clearly, if we're going to be successful, we've got to work with our allies.
In the interest of time, we'll do one more question from me, and then we'll open some things up to everyone out in the audience. I would like to take up the COVID-19 pandemic, if we could, as the next topic. I'd like to get your assessment, each of you, of the battle against the virus. It's probably fair to say that the United States is a vaccine-rich country, but not yet a vaccination-rich country, in a sense. And yet, while we struggle in the United States to achieve a wider adoption of vaccination, many other parts of the world simply struggle to gain access to wider access to vaccines themselves. And we know that the pandemic will only really be held in check if we can make vaccine access more widespread globally. What do you think the prospects are for making some progress on that front? And Ambassador, I may ask you more directly. I know you're a strong advocate for opening up travel. What do you think the prospects are for that issue as well?
You want to jump in
You
first?
could start if you'd
I'll
like,
be
sure.
very quick on this. So unless you vaccinate the whole world, you're not safe yourself. We see this with the Delta variant. that means that we have to massively fund COVAX, the international facility that gives vaccines to poorer countries, and Americans and Europeans are the two biggest contributors to COVAX today. That means that we have to actually allow our vaccines to go to different countries, vaccines produced in our borders. I'm very proud as a European to let you know that we allowed the exact same number of vaccines produced in Europe to be exported from day one of the COVID pandemic to more than 130 countries in the world as the number of vaccines that went into European arms. Initially, that meant that we were slower in getting Europeans vaccinated, and today we have about 75% of all European adults fully vaccinated. Now, solidarity is not charity when it comes to COVID-19. And we strive to be a solidarity superpower in this. We will be launching on Monday, Americans and Europeans together, Commissioner Breton from Europe and Jeff Zients in the White House. What we agreed at the European Union-US summit in June between President Biden and President von der Leyen and Michel, which is a COVID manufacturing, vaccine and therapeutics supply chain task force. And we'll be working together as the two biggest vaccine producing and therapeutics innovation producing continents to get those vaccines to everyone else. Remember, the Pfizer vaccine, the first vaccine, was the direct result of a European and American collaboration. It was Pfizer in the US and BioNTech in Europe, in Germany, who developed this vaccine together, who produced it together, and it was the first vaccine and a supremely effective one. I'm very proud of that American and European collaboration. Guys, it happens every day. It's not in the press, it's not written down, it happens every day. This is why this relationship is so tremendously important. And I close. And this is also of interest to New Hampshire directly, but to everyone really. Our trade and economic relationship is the biggest relationship in the world, America and Europe, by far. The European Union is the biggest trade and investment partner of New Hampshire itself, by far. About $3 billion worth of goods get exported to Europe every year from New Hampshire. About $7 billion of investment from European companies is happening in New Hampshire. This is creating about 30,000 jobs in the state. That's huge. So as we come out of COVID, we're also thinking about our economic recovery. And we have to do this. The moment we do this, in addition to getting rid of the scourge of COVID itself, we're kickstarting our economies in a way that is supremely important to both of us. Travel. There's a travel ban in place, remarkably, fundamentally only for European Union states. President Trump put that in place. There are a couple of other countries as well, but about 170 countries around the world are not covered by it at all. Now, when it was put in place, Europe was spiking in cases. But today, Europe is the most vaccinated continent in the world. And because of that as well, the new cases are way lower than virtually anywhere else in the world. And yet, that travel ban is still in place. This means our businessmen tell us, and businesswomen in Europe, that the biggest trade barrier today to economic growth in this relationship is the fact that they cannot travel here to invest more, oversee their investments, do more investments. There are hundreds of thousands of Europeans in this country with non-immigrant work visas who work in this country, pay their taxes. They can fly back to Europe because they're Europeans, but they're not allowed to fly back to the States because they're not green card holders or something like that. But if you are in any one of 150 countries around the world today that have way higher spikes in COVID and way lower vaccination rates, you can fly directly to the United States simply with a pre-travel test. So what we are asking the US administration is, as we do, to lift this travel ban immediately and safely. We allow Americans who are vaccinated to come to the European Union already for a number of months without any restriction. not because we're crazy and we like COVID, because we do know that, in fact, this is the pandemic now of the unvaccinated. And we're not going to be keeping Americans, businessmen and women, people who want to travel to see Europe, families who want to unite, we're not going to keep them away for any domestic European political reason.
I'm assuming that everybody here is interested in politics, and that's part of the reason you're here. And so you know that in California there was a recall of Governor Newsom, an attempted recall, and that it failed overwhelmingly. And I thought the best line about that campaign was that the vote was the revenge of the vaccinated. I think people in America are done with those people who refuse to get vaccinated. This is a decision that is not political, should never be political. It's really unfortunate that there is a misinformation campaign that is being fostered by Russia and China and those countries who would do the United States harm, to create conspiracies about why you shouldn't get vaccinated. We need to base our decisions, our policy decisions, on data and science. And just like this university has done in saying, if you're going to come in and go back in person in class, then you need to be vaccinated. If we are ever going to see the end of the coronavirus and return life to normal, we have got to get vaccinated, not just in the United States, but as the ambassador says, the whole world. Just as we've been able to eliminate other diseases, almost eliminated tuberculosis, whooping cough, so many diseases that 100 years ago killed people around the world, and we've been able to eliminate them. No, most people don't object when their kids have to get vaccinated for measles, mumps, rubella to go to school. So why people are concerned about COVID-19 is a real puzzle, and it's a detriment to the country and to the individuals whose health is being put at risk. And the fact that we are now using kids who need to be back in school as a political football in this fight, I think is just unforgivable. So we've got to get people vaccinated. We need to work together around the world to do that. There are a number of global efforts to make that happen, and I hope we will be successful.
Thank you very much. At this point, we have a little bit of overflow time. If anyone has a question in the audience, you can put your hand up. I'll bring the microphone out to whoever. I'm going to do my Oprah routine now. I'll just go up and down the aisles. Let's start right here.
My question is very quick.
Can we ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Professor Frank Catano. I teach in the sociology department here. My question is very quick. Either of you can answer it, and that is, are there any research groups on climate change trying to develop technologies to remove carbon from the atmosphere? All the efforts to, ask people to reduce their carbon footprint are great, but are we also developing them to remove the carbon from the atmosphere?
There is some funding that's being proposed that would address carbon removal. There is a project in Iceland that is actually taking carbon out of the air, and there have been a couple of pilot projects throughout this country. None of them have been financially successful at this point. I think that's been the big issue.
And frankly, we have decided in Europe that we want to move away from carbon. I mean, it's very important as what is there to find good ways to transition. But if we're going to be investing massively in something, it has to be in the new green technologies that will replace carbon anyway. And better to do it as soon as possible than in 20, 30 years and waste all this money in trying to mitigate the effects of continuing to use the carbon.
Hello. Is this? Oh, there we go. Yep.
Again, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. My name is Cameron Pete Arfar. So I have a question about. So you're trying to like it's climate change. Have you thought? What are your thoughts on nuclear energy? And what about recycling? How do you guys plan on combating recycling when most of the stuff that gets recycled doesn't actually get recycled?
Yeah. Well, nuclear energy is one of the forms of energy out there. It's clean, you can say, but it's also very, very heavily subsidized around the world right now. So a lot of, I mean, so like many other technologies, it's not profit generating in and of itself. It requires a tremendous amount of subsidization for it to be profitable, at least at its initial stages. Now, there are also major developments and technological developments in nuclear energy. In the case of Europe, we don't have a policy that some member states, some countries in Europe have nuclear energy. Others have banned nuclear energy because of the fear of the consequences. But our efforts are focused very much on the competitive advantage, green transition technologies that are out there, without excluding any European country that wants to use nuclear energy from doing so.
You know, I used to be opposed to nuclear energy back when the Seabrook nuclear power plant was being built. I don't feel that way now, because I think if we're really going to address climate change, nuclear energy has to be part of our energy mix. And I agree, we've been subsidizing it, but we've also been subsidizing oil and gas for a very long time. We need to stop doing that. We need to let the market work and support with respect to those fossil fuels that have been around for a long time. But we need to also encourage new energy technologies. We need to look at reducing the waste stream. As you point out, recycling is not getting it done, and we've got to figure out how to get plastics and other waste out of the waste stream. I am not aware that there is any government effort right now to do that in the United States. Most of that is being led by nonprofits who are doing a very good job, but we need to provide some public
And take plastics.
policies on that.
Take plastics. I think it's a fantastic point. So our oceans right now, everyone will tell you, the biggest danger for our oceans is plastics.
Right.
They kill all kinds of marine life. They kill the livelihood of fishing and other communities, and they kill biodiversity. So what we've done in Europe, we tend to be a little more not that afraid of regulating when we feel that we can get to a consensus of that. We talked to the plastics industry and to other industries using plastics, and we agreed that we would ban the use of plastics in the European Union of the 10 most used plastics: straws, plastic knives, plastic forks. And by 2030, we will also ban any container box that is not fully recyclable, that contains plastic. And the industry agreed to this. The companies that we talked to agreed to this. They also see a great potential there. You take a plastic fork, okay? It takes about, this is a fact, 5 seconds to produce. It takes about 5 minutes to use. It takes about 5 centuries, 500 years for it to decompose. 5 seconds, 5 minutes, 5 centuries. You tell me why that's smart.
And some of this is about education, but a lot of it is about money. I mean, it's about the fact that you can produce that plastic fork cheaper than you can provide an alternative, or you can recycle it. And that's the challenge. It's the challenge we've got with our energy use. It's a challenge that we've got with climate change in so many ways.
Hello, my name is Jordan Friedley. I'm a student here. You guys have talked about, of course, 3 problems, and I feel all 3 problems affect not just the European Union or America, but every nation in the world. How do you propose that not just the European Union and America, but every nation comes as a collaborative effort to either combat climate change or combat a vaccine, because we see countries like China, for example, who may not care that they're dumping things into the ocean, or they're not necessarily disposing them of how they should be. Or as you said, when it comes to vaccines, they don't want to get vaccinated. They want to scare America in particular to not get vaccines. So how would you think, like, what would be a solution that we would have to make sure that Earth as a whole is able to work together?
Well, that's why these cooperative efforts are so important. It's why the UN is important and why we need to help empower and provide the funding that the UN needs in order to operate. And let me be clear on China. China actually has a very aggressive vaccine effort to try and provide vaccines to countries around the world. I was in the country of Georgia back in June and sitting next to a woman at a dinner who had gotten her vaccination from China. So we need to do better, as the ambassador said, in providing vaccines from the United States. The point I was making is that they are promoting conspiracy theories in the United States to divide the country around vaccines. They're very happy to provide their vaccine to countries around the world. One example is the Law of the Sea Treaty. There's an international treaty called the Law of the Sea Treaty. China's part of it. I think there are only 2 countries that are not. You may
Yes.
know. But one of the countries that is not is the United States. So how are we going to have an influence on China, on Russia, on those countries that may be bad actors if we're not participating, if we're not at the table? And the reason we're not at the table is because this has become a partisan, ideological, political issue. And we've got to help people understand why that does not make sense, why it's not in America's interest to allow those kinds of ideologies to influence what's going to be in our best interest and in the world's best interest. Because, in fact, it is our ability to work together that's going to ultimately deal with these issues.
Absolutely. And what I would say, I fully agree. So I asked you at the beginning a question, what's so scary about smart girls? I'll ask you another question now, which is what's the dirty secret around cargo containers? Every time that we put in a product that Americans or Europeans make in a container to ship it somewhere around the world, in that same container, we also put in, by definition, our values. So when I produce a good here in the US or in Europe, I do it by respecting labor rights and labor standards. I don't violate them in order to make it cheaper. I do it by respecting environmental laws. I don't violate them in order to make it cheaper. Well, guess what? Other countries around the world, in their containers with their goods, put in their own values as well. So when you look at international trade, when you look at new technologies as they develop, don't think of it simply as money. You have to understand its values. So take climate. We in Europe have announced what we call a carbon border adjustment mechanism. That fundamentally is a way to ensure that as we are investing massively, imposing major costs on our companies as well in Europe to reduce our carbon footprint, we cannot allow carbon leakage. The carbon that we save to be imported into Europe by countries that are exporting in their containers their environmentally catastrophic values. That's, if you like, an incentive, and it has worked as an incentive for many of these countries already, knowing that this is coming, it's not yet in place, it's coming, to try both companies and countries to reduce their footprint. Okay, so that's a big deal. On the 29th of September, in Pittsburgh, Americans and Europeans, the 2 biggest economies in the world and the 2 biggest technological innovators, will be getting together to kick off what we decided will set up the Trade and Technology Council between the EU and the US. And in that council, we will ensure that a technological leadership in the next years is not overtaken by countries like China, that we will be able to set the rules of the road for the economy of the 21st century, including the standards for things like artificial intelligence use. Right now, a face recognition camera in Xinjiang in China is being used, setting standards for its use in order to repress people and to follow them all the way around. When China exports those cameras to other countries, it exports its values with those cameras and its standards. It can't be. We will have to set those standards, Americans and Europeans together. Guys, America and Europe is not some nice to have thing. It's out there every day creating the biggest economic relationship in the world, the biggest values relationship in the world, the biggest security relationship in the world. We wouldn't be here, either you or us, had we not been at it with the leadership of people like Senator Shaheen for decades. And I'm not going to lose this leadership now to anyone because of any little friction here or there. We are building now, as we speak, the new relationship of the future, and I'm super, super, super hopeful.
That is an excellent point to finish on. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Please join me in thanking the Ambassador and the Senator for their time with us here today.
Okay, let me suggest something, because for me, it's such an honor to be on the same stage at Southern New Hampshire University with Senator Shaheen. Let's try to take a photo if we can. So the Senator and I can maybe stand here. Look, maybe a photographer come up there, and you all guys can stand up, and then we'll have a photo of all of us.
We could actually put you down there, and I could do a panorama.
Or you could put us down there if you
yeah,
want.
that's a better idea.
That's a better idea.
That's quicker.
Harry, go right ahead. We have a professional photographer or three in the room. Who could just stay right where you are. Yeah. If you could move to the middle so we could get just a photo in the middle, that would be wonderful, and then we can all be on our way. Oh, they're just going to move right over in the middle. Oh, you do move whatever you need to, sir. Just slide right into the middle, quick 5-second photograph. Harry. Stand up, please. All right. As long as. Wonderful. All right. Smile. That's a bad joke, but, you know. Wonderful. Thank you all very much for coming.